If you're interested in having a good life, then you want to know what is driving your choices. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will drive your life and you'll call it fate. Ultimately, who we are is just a walking conversation. Your whole life is based on programming. And what's programming? It's language. The term abracadabra, the actual Hebrew translation of that is, as I speak, so I create. We're all magicians. It's just that most people are oblivious to the magic and the spells that they're casting on themselves. Most people's driving motivators are compensatory. So meaning somebody wants to have money or they want to be successful as a compensation for a deeper seated feeling of inadequacy or insecurity. A lot of very successful men typically like, well, if I lose that edge, if I lose that drive, which is really fear and them trying to prove themselves, they're like, well, then I won't have any drive. And it's quite the opposite. You can only worry what other people think about you if you think there's something worth worrying about you. Life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. So that's why triggers are gifts, is because it's showing that you're still misidentified with the limited version of your human identity as opposed to the limitless version of your true essence.
What is true happiness?
True happiness.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We have a very special guest joining us today, Peter Crone, also known as the Mind Architect. He's a writer, speaker, and thought leader in human potential. With over 20 years of experience, he has coached celebrities, athletes, and high-level leaders. Peter specializes in revealing the limiting beliefs and subconscious narratives that shape behavior, health, relationships, and performance. Peter, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. It's great to have you here. And you talk a lot about the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
I would like to understand, why is understanding the subconscious mind so important?
Well, I mean, because if you're interested in having a good life, you want to understand what drives whether you do or you don't, right? And the subconscious, it really defines the foundation for what it is to be human. So it is the precursor to all of our thoughts, our feelings, our actions and behaviors, and then consequently our results. So last I checked, whether I'm working with high-end performers or everyday folk, people are interested in outcomes and results. So if you want to have good results, which is akin to having a good life, then you want to know what is driving your choices. So the subconscious, it's foundational. It really is the context within which we function, these patterns, limitations that get formulated during our childhood that then really inform the way that we show up as a human, what defines our personality. So that's why for me, it's everything, because it's what drives the whole show.
And what are some common like subconscious beliefs or patterns that people have?
Well, there's many. My first book that I'm writing right now, I delineate 10 that I feel every human being has. But the ones that most people will be most familiar with or probably will have struggled with is the idea that they're maybe not good enough or not enough, or the feeling that perhaps they're not loved for who they are, or also for women particularly, the feeling of not just being safe. So these are some of what I call these primal prisons that everybody lives within. And I get the pleasure and the joy of helping people break out of prison from their own subconscious.
Why do so many people have this belief that they're not good enough? And how can they get over it?
Well, it's part of the human conditioning. So it's sort of the factory default settings of the ego. So the way that I look at it, again, in the way that I write about it and speak about it, is that we all arrive with these pre-installed constraints. And this is what the paradigm of planet Earth is all about, is that we as a soul, divine, limitless, boundless, timeless, have become misidentified with constraints. And so everybody can relate to it. Some people transcend it at an earlier age. Some people, it bugs them for many decades. They could be 50, 60 and still thinking that they're not enough. So for me, it's just understanding that is the factory default settings of the human psyche, is these 10 prisons. So not being enough is just part of the programming of what it is to be human. The opportunity is to then transcend that, to break out of that. And that to me is what this paradigm is about. We arrive with constraints, and the opportunity of being human is to liberate ourselves from those limitations.
And do you have some maybe practical techniques you do with your clients or the people you coach that help them break free of these limitations and feel like they are enough and they are lovable?
I mean, for sure, it's what I do every day. I don't know about a technique. I mean, the technique that I use is very proprietary to me, I feel, because what I do is I talk about these two main buckets, which is awareness and practice. Carl Jung had a beautiful quote. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will drive your life and you'll call it fate." Right. So that to me is, I'm calling it subconscious, but the same point holds true, which is we're being driven by these blind spots. And so the technique is to bring awareness to, why is it that somebody struggles with their career or they don't make enough money? Why is it that somebody has had a bit of a chronic sickness for a while? Why is it that somebody in relationships doesn't feel fulfilled or valued or seen, and their relationships don't work? So there's these patterns. So the technique is to use those everyday human woes and problems to reverse engineer your own identity, right? So if you struggle in the arena of relationships, perhaps what's underlying that in your subconscious conditioning is you're not lovable, or your needs don't matter, or you're not very special, or whatever it is that you're not. And then in a relationship, we tend to compensate, right? So then the relationship isn't based on authenticity or true connection and affinity. It's based on survival, manipulation, and coping strategies, which is what most relationships are. So the technique is to be awake enough to pay attention to where you get upset, triggered, or where things aren't working. And then the harder part is to discover what is the underlying programming that has you create those circumstances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Do
So
you
that's the
think
awareness part. The practice is, okay, once you've seen whatever the prison is, I'm not good enough, I'm not loved, I'm not safe, whatever it is, then the practice is to be a human being who's no longer in that prison. Like, who could you be in the absence of that limitation? Oh, I feel amazing. I'd feel free. I would speak my mind. I would speak my truth. I wouldn't be held back. I'd be more energized. Okay, well, that's the new identity you now need to practice.
how do you go about changing your identity and what's the importance of that?
So the word change isn't inaccurate, but it's insufficient. So it's not so much about changing, it's about recognizing the illusion of the current personality or identity someone has, right? So for me, once you start to feel these constraints and frustrations in the everyday human experience, and then you recognize, oh, I have from the age of 3 or 5 or 7, when mom did this or dad said that, felt whatever it is, and I can see that I'm being driven by this deep code of I'm not enough, or I'm not loved, or I'm not wanted, then the change happens automatically when you do what I call investigate the validity of that constraint, right? Meaning we're checking, is it an absolute truth that you're not good enough? And you'll have all the evidence. Yeah, well, I wasn't picked for the soccer team, or my first boyfriend dumped me, or I didn't get the best grades compared to my brother or sister. That's just evidence to reinforce the statement, but the statement itself isn't true. So the change happens when you recognize the illusory nature of the narrative. It's not an absolute truth. It's just something that has been there for so long, it's become your subjective experience, right? So when you see it's not true, then all of a sudden there's nothing more to fight. It's like, I always use this analogy. 2000 years ago, Galileo, he discovered that the world we live on is a globe, right? And I know some people are still fighting for it's flat, and at this point I don't even fucking know, I don't care. But before that, everyone thought it was flat. So within that context, within that limitation, the fear that is appropriate to that is, oh, I don't want to fall off the edge, right? That fear makes sense for the concern. So in a world like I'm not good enough, making that equivalent to a flat earth, then The fear could be, oh, I'm not going to get the job. I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to, make enough money. Those fears make sense if you think you're not good enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when Galileo said the world is a globe, in fact, we're held to it by gravity. And even if you're the greatest basketball player who can jump very high, you're still not going to jump off, right?
Mm.
Like try and jump off the planet, right? So
Mm.
then the fear of falling off dissolves. You don't need to change it, you see, because you're living in a new perspective. So what I'm giving people are new eyes, new perspectives, and therefore they don't need to change anything because the change is it's commensurate with, it's automatic with the new perspective. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah,
And
100%.
that's why it's so powerful, because when you realize, and again, with my work, I call this process double negation, which is a fancy way of saying two nots, right? So if you thought you're not good enough, what I help people say is, no, you're not good enough. And so it's the dissolution, right? It dissolves. Like my catchphrase is, I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. So when you recognize, oh, I'm not good enough, that goes, and then immediately what comes to the surface is a sense of freedom and relief.
Mm. And is it just about acknowledging that? Because I think a lot of people, for instance, if they don't feel good enough, let's say they had an adverse experience of being rejected or ostracized in middle school, right? And
Yeah,
that leads to the belief, I'm not good enough. And then their whole life, they try to prove to themselves that they are good enough,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they make loads of money, or they get in
Yeah,
a relationship with someone rich or attractive, but
yeah,
it doesn't seem to really work because that underlying feeling is still there.
correct. Yeah. And that's what ultimately drives human behavior, which is why your first question about the importance of understanding the subconscious, because no matter how successful someone becomes, no matter how hot or attractive their husband or wife is, what you'll notice is most of those behaviors are compensatory, right? Meaning that it's a strategy to overcome the belief. But if you're trying to overcome the deep-seated belief, all you're doing is reinforcing it.
Mm.
And that's why no matter how successful somebody becomes, they don't find joy or fulfillment, because the means by which they became successful was driven by the limitation that they're trying to get rid of.
Mm. I love that. I think people should listen to that twice,
Yes.
because we're all trapped in this race, the carrot in front of us,
Yeah.
thinking finally at one point we'll get there, but it
Yeah.
doesn't work like that.
It's very subtle, it's very slippery, it's very insidious, and that's why I spoke deliberately a little bit more slowly so people can understand the mechanism, the means by which most people are driven to success or beauty or fame or whatever it is that people would put under the auspices of, like, I'm living a good life. The mechanism that drives them is usually the feeling of insecurity or inadequacy that then they can never escape.
Mm. And would you say most successful people, maybe, if coached athletes and celebrities, do they have this underlying feeling of I'm not good enough? Or what is it that drives them? And what's the most effective driver to success?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, yes, 100%, because every human being is being fundamentally driven by these deep-seated beliefs of inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity. These are the primal prisons, the default setting of what it is to be human. So I don't care who I'm working with. It could be one of the biggest rock stars in the world, or one of the most highly accolade, successful, wealthy athlete, or it could be a billionaire who owns multi-conglomerates around the world. It doesn't matter, because you're human. And so that, first of all, allows me to access, like, the deep-seated conditioning of any human without being caught up in their human persona. I'm not really, without sounding disrespectful, I don't care who anybody is. I'm interested in where their soul is trapped. So, but in terms of what is the most powerful, I think they all have their own merit, like in terms of, like, what generates success. Somebody who's not loved, they might become incredibly attractive. This is very true for women who have put a immense amount of pressure on themselves to be beautiful and thin and young and all the things, right? And then for guys, it's, they're not strong enough, they're not good enough, they're failures, whatever their story is that they compensate for, and they become, six pack like Adonises who own millions of dollars and have got all the toys. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The thing to recognize is if you're being driven by a lie that is based in fear, it doesn't matter how successful you become, you're still going to be unfulfilled.
Mm, absolutely. And
Mhm.
I've heard you talk about the power of language. Can you
Yeah,
please talk to me more about that?
sure. I mean, hopefully by now everyone's recognizing that, you know, ultimately who we are is just a walking conversation. It's all programming, you know, you as a being, Francesca, me, anybody is really the culmination of all of these things that we've heard and believed and assimilated and taken on and integrated as though that's us. That even your name, your nationality, your age, these aren't truths, but they are the cornerstones of your personality. And so, language, it's for me, it's so paramount to understand that your whole life is based on programming. And what's programming? It's language. Even the term abracadabra, most people, nearly everyone's heard it because of magicians, whether they're kids or adults. You hear the word abracadabra. The actual Hebrew translation of that is, as I speak, so I create,
Mm.
which is so cool. So we're all magicians. It's just that most people are oblivious to the magic and the spells that they're casting on themselves. Most people's spelling is dark. It's, black magic. I'm not good enough, but it's still magic. They're still creating that. So that's why language to me is paramount to understand. And it really is the precursor to living an extraordinary life. Because if you're living in words and language and code and programming that's based in limitation, then you can't access the potentiality of your soul. But if your words align with the limitless nature of who you are at your essence, then look out, you're going to live an extraordinary life. And it all comes down
Mm.
to words.
Mm.
That's so, for me, I find it so fascinating.
Yeah, me too, absolutely. And is there a way to reprogram your subconscious mind to become successful and get what you want in life?
I mean, the problem's in the question, right? Because if you're trying to reprogram your subconscious to become successful, what you're reinforcing again is the idea that you're not. And from
Mm.
my perspective, everyone is successful in their nature, right? Meaning, how do you define success? We have an image of success in today's society, right? It looks something like wealth. Okay, you have a lot of it. It looks something like maybe power. You have some of that. It looks something like a bit of fame or notoriety. Maybe you have a lot of that with followers or whatever it is. You're on TV or you're a singer or an actor and whatever it is. Like that's what we call success. To me, I've worked with all those people for decades, and I don't know that any of them are successful from my lens. Because to me, true success is synonymous with being totally at peace. And
Mm.
so I would say that our true nature is successful because when we understand the essence of who we are at our sort of deepest level, our spiritual level, our soul, true consciousness, that is peace. It's the stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives and dialogues that we have arrived with and then found reinforcement through life, like I'm not enough, I'm not loved, I'm not safe, I'm not wanted, whatever it is. That's where the absence of success lies. And then the compensation is what we see as external material success, right? But underneath it all, there's true success, which is understanding your own divinity, understanding your own extraordinary, brilliant essence, understanding your boundless, limitless self. That's success.
Mm. And if someone is like, okay, that sounds amazing, but
Yeah,
you
it
know,
is.
I don't have money, or I wanna, I wanna get more money, or I wanna perform in my sport. Like, how do I go about achieving that? If an athlete comes to you and they're like, I want to achieve this, how do
Yeah.
you go about helping them?
Well, first of all, you have to recognize the underlying intention, right? So most people's driving motivators are compensatory, right? So meaning somebody wants to have money or they want to be successful in performance as an athlete as a compensation for a deeper seated feeling of inadequacy or insecurity. Now, again, if that's the driving motivator, then you might get success in the external world, but it's still going to leave people unfulfilled, as I said earlier. And that's why a lot of people have millions of dollars, millions of fans, still end up in rehab with a drug addiction. Or, I've seen athletes who've won the biggest accolade and then they go into depression because it didn't do it for them. They thought as a kid, oh, if I could just win Wimbledon, or I could win the US Open in tennis, or, we win the World Series, that would be amazing. And you get this euphoric moment for sure. But then afterwards, you're left with the same underlying conditioning and program that's based in limitation, and you just don't have anything else to strive for. And so I've seen, like, I know a golfer, he won the British Open, which is one of the greatest accomplishments for any golfer. And he went into a severe depression because he didn't know what else to do anymore, right? It's not like all of a sudden you get to this moment, this Sartori moment of complete awakening, and white light comes through your genitals, and all of a sudden you can walk on water. It's like, no, it's tomorrow you wake up and you got to take the kids to school, and there's laundry to be done, and you got to figure out what you're going to eat for dinner. And it's like, it's the same old. And you're like, well, what's the fucking point? So for me, the way I help most people, regardless of whether they're athletes or whomever, is to see what is the underlying motivator. Because, one of my catchphrases, I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. So in that case, solving a problem might be, well, I want to be successful to solve my feeling of inadequacy because my dad always thought I was a loser and I'd never amount to anything. Well, now you're in reaction to something. Whereas if I can get rid of the belief that you're somehow less than, or that your dad didn't think much of you, then you've already succeeded without having to actually attain anything. Does that make sense? So it seems counterintuitive to the way that the human ego is programmed, which is I want something and it's outside of me and it's in the future. This is why people are on the hamster wheel thinking that the life they want is in the one day when everything falls into place. No, that's exhaustion. That's illusion. True freedom, true success is to be completely at peace where you are right now, regardless of the circumstances.
And how does someone's performance change once they gain that inner peace and those, underlying motivators that were, quite negative, dissolve, as you said?
That's a beautiful question. Not many people get that. So that speaks volumes about both your listening and your understanding. So I just acknowledge that. But yeah, because a lot of very successful men typically like, well, if I lose that edge, if I lose that drive, if I lose what sort of they think defines them, which is really fear and them trying to really prove themselves, which is often trying to disprove, say, a dad or a father figure or a high school teacher who was hard on them. They're like, well, then I won't have any drive. And it's quite the opposite, because when you tap into the essence of who you are, you uncover my main product that I bring everybody, which is freedom. You become completely free. And when you're free, there's nothing that holds you back. So you actually start to create more extraordinary results, but with less effort. Because it's akin to driving a car with one foot on the accelerator, but one foot on the brake when you're coming from ego. The brake being the I'm not this, I'm not that. This is never going to happen for me. It's too good to be true. This isn't it. All of these constraints. And then you have to push harder on the accelerator to compensate and overcome that. Whereas if you take your foot off the brake, realizing there's nothing wrong with you, and that fundamentally all you're fighting is these linguistic prisons, these ideas of inadequacy and insecurity based in words, and then you just breathe the biggest sigh of relief. And now you become more childlike in the fact that there's nothing that you can't imagine. There's nothing that you feel is impossible. And then it just becomes a matter of discipline and dedication and commitment to keep pursuing whatever it is that you're passionate about. But there's no more the obstacle. There's no more the avoidant energy. There's no more the inhibition or the fear. So it actually becomes better results with less effort.
That sounds amazing. And I would imagine it becomes more playful as well, or, you approach things in a more playful, like curious way as a kid without, this thing like, I need to get that, otherwise I'm a failure. It's more like, oh, let's see what happens.
Amen. And that's why I said it's childlike. It is literally, if you look at the playfulness, the energy, the joy, the true sense of possibility a child has, they're only limited by imagination, right? But an adult, what happens for an adult is they have all of these feelings of failure, disappointment, trials, tribulations, things that didn't work out, and they use that as evidence to start to dilute their imagination. Well, that's not going to happen. That's too good to be true. No, that you can't do that. That's silly to pursue. Like, you get all of this language that becomes the obstacle to the underlying sense of possibility that never went anywhere. So it is exactly that. It's playful, it's joyous, it's vital, it's alive. And that's why I sort of put it under the auspices of childlike, where you become fully self-expressed, You don't see any kind of obstacle. You don't see anything as being too hard or impossible.
Mm,
And that to me is the most joyous way to live life.
amazing. And if someone's dealing with immense fear of failure, how would you
Yeah.
help them overcome that?
By realizing failure is just a conversation, right? So, what if someone has a fear of failure, which is a future proposition? Fear is always related to the way that we're seeing outcome, right? So, future events appearing real is one way that people break down it as an acronym, fear.
Mhm.
But it's how we relate to the future. So, first of all, one of my quotes, they say, "Past hurt informs future fear." So, whenever we've had disappointments, which we all do because we're human, then the brain uses that as evidence to look out for that not to happen again, because that's where we got hurt or disappointed, or we felt, that somebody looked down on us, or we lost love, or whatever it is that hurt. And so now we have a fear of failure, which actually is not a fear of failure at all, right? It's a fear of not being loved. It's a fear of death for the ego.
Mm.
So if you realize that you didn't fail, you just did something. There was an experience, and whatever happened, happened, and it couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't, is another one of, my more popular quotes. And so when you really see that, then you come back to that childlike playfulness of realizing, okay, well, that didn't work out. I learned my lesson. And if it's an arena, whether it's relationships, sports, health, money, or whatever that I'm still passionate about, now I'm more experienced. So that's great. So now that I go into it again, I know what doesn't work. So it's
Mm.
not about failing again. It's about realizing, no, failure isn't a person, and it's not even an event. So when someone says I'm a failure, that's just completely inaccurate. You're a human being who, like any one of us, is doing the best they can within the limits of their conditioning. And some things work great and some things don't. And the things that don't are just opportunities to learn. When sports teams I work with, especially like baseball and soccer or American football, it's at the end of the day, it's a win or a loss, right? In the newspaper the next day, you see a W or an L.
Yeah,
And I would always teach my players, it's not a win or a loss. It's either you win or you learn something. And it changes the
that's so
context.
powerful. Yeah,
Yeah. So there's no
100%.
failure. There's just what happened and the degree to which you want to use that as evidence to either stop yourself or as education to promote yourself.
Mm. And for someone who keeps worrying about what other people think and how other people will perceive them,
Yeah.
how can they stop?
By realizing the illusion. They're not worried what other people think about them. They're worried what they think about them.
Mm.
If you think you're worried about what other people think about you, you're already digging in the wrong place. Again, one of my quotes, I say, you can only worry what other people think about you if you think there's something worth worrying about you.
Mm. So you're kind of judging yourself through other people.
Not kind of. You are judging us. Literally, there's
Wow.
no kind of about it. Yeah. Which is fine. It's human because we're all designed to want to be loved. The primordial imperative of every human being or organism is to survive. So we want to belong, because if you don't belong, you're kicked out of the gang and you're going to get eaten by a bigger predator. So it looks like, oh, if I'm not accepted by this group, then I'm not going to make it, which is why I said earlier, it's not about failure. It's about the fear of being loved, or actually death of the ego, which is scary. So in this case, I'm not worried what other people think about me, but because of my programming and the default settings of a human being, I've got some feeling of inadequacy and insecurity, which is normal. That's the programming. But it's not for me to get other people to like me to overcome that. It's for me to transcend it and realize it's not true. I'm part of humanity. I'm part of the gang. I can't not belong. And once we see that, we relax. We're not separate. We're part of the whole. And ironically, when you're at peace like that, you become one of the most lovable people around, because everybody else wants a piece of that. Like literally, I want a piece of
Mm.
that piece.
Mm. A piece of that piece, yes. And how about imposter syndrome?
hmm Well, it's basically the same thing, right? It's like where there's an idea of yourself that's somehow thinking that you don't belong or that you're not enough. But they're just stories, they're narratives, they're not truths. It doesn't mean that you'll be the best presenter in the company or the most efficient person with numbers and business or the best athlete or the best lover but you belong. And so really this whole game is about not being accepted by life or others, but by being accepted by ourselves.
Mm.
So the imposter syndrome is not against other people, it's our own belief against ourselves.
Mm. I think that's really powerful and kind of challenges the general perception people have about it.
Yeah. Well, that tends to be my work and my teachings that resonate with people because they're like, holy shit, I never looked at it like that. And why I love, Marcel Proust, he's a French writer, and he said that the journey of true discovery lies not in finding new lands, but looking through new eyes. So I'm giving
Mm.
new eyes to realize, oh, I'm not a failure. I've never failed. But there is, by virtue of being human, this underlying belief and a concern for the fact that I might be a failure and that might result in me not being loved. But it's really the deep seated feeling of not being lovable, because that's the factory default settings of a human, that has me have this symptomatic fear on the surface. But underneath it, if I find true love and acceptance for me, then with all due respect, everybody can think whatever they want to think about me. That's not mine to control or manipulate or worry about.
One of the quotes I most like from you is, "The things that trigger you in life are gifts." Can you please expand more on that?
Sure. It sort of reminds me of my actual favorite quote of mine is life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. So the
Mm.
triggers really speak to that quote, right? Which is that wherever you're being triggered meaning upset, you lose your centeredness, you become emotional, you become withdrawn, you become aggressive. The fight, flight, or freeze that we see in most human beings when they're under some perceived threat is really the opportunity to reveal where you're not okay with something or you're not free. So that's why triggers are gifts, is because it's showing that you're still misidentified with the limited version of your human identity as opposed to the limitless version of your true essence. And that is two different worlds completely. And that's my work, is to help people step out of the world of limitation, fear, suffering, and disease, which is the current operating system that humans live in, and introduce them to the world that's on the other side of that, which is the world of freedom, love, possibility, and vitality. So that's why
Mm.
triggers are a gift, to see where you're still operating in a very old paradigm.
Mm. Amazing. And something else I wanted to talk about is, why do some people struggle with finding love while others seem to, have it come their way very easily?
Well, I think the emphasis there is that others seem to have it come their way easily, right? So it can look like it on the surface, but I wouldn't say that, the people that we see as having a lot of love, it might on Instagram look great. It might even as your neighbors look great because they go on their weekly trips or they seem to be really happy, but you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. So at the end of the
Mm.
day, whoever you are, whatever form of relationship you're in, there's going to be contention. There's going to be obstacles, because it's through relationships fundamentally that we get to really evolve and grow. So love, it looks like people might get love, and for other people, finding love is tough. Really, ultimately, without sounding too cliche, what it comes down to is the degree to which you have love for yourself is the precursor to the degree to which you find love in the world. Life is a mirror, right? The external world is really reflecting the inner world. And so if you internally have the absence of love because you think that you're not enough, you're a bad person, you're not good enough, you're not wanted, you're not safe, whatever it is that has somebody live in a prison in their own head, there is the absence of love. And so that person energetically, literally, psychologically, emotionally, physically isn't going to be as attractive because they don't have any sense of true inherent self-worth. Now, sometimes people compensate for that, right? For a lot of girls, the pressure is on their beauty, right? So you've got the whole world of clothing, plastic surgery, makeup, hair. Like, these are combined trillion-dollar industries, right? Where people, women particularly, are put under an inordinate amount of pressure to look a certain way as a means of trying to get love. But it's a compensation versus just loving oneself for who one is. Then that becomes the most attractive person in the room versus someone who's trying to be seen, who's proving, who's desperately wanting to get attention, which is the compensation for the underlying feeling of lack of self-love. So that's really the real game of love, is not about getting other people to like you, but for you to like you, for you to accept you, and fundamentally for you to love you, including the part of you that doesn't feel lovable. That is the real opportunity and the challenge that it is to be human.
Mm. I think in today's society, especially in my generation, Gen Z, there's a big confusion between as to what self love means. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people confuse it with self obsession or
Mm-hmm.
arrogance. And so I'd like to define what self love is, if you can help me.
For sure, and I get it, and I have compassion for the pressure that, as you said, not just your generation, but humans as a whole are under, right? So the way that I define it, as I sort of just spoke to, is that true self-love is learning to love the part of you that doesn't feel lovable.
Mm.
And everybody's got that part. To some
Mm-hmm.
degree, it might be subtle. For some, it completely defines their every waking minute, where they just feel like life is pointless and they don't want to leave the house and they don't take care of themselves because the part of them that feels unlovable is really, really, has through perhaps trauma become their defining identity. For most people, it's more subtle, right? It plays in the background and it kind of interferes with their sense of freedom and their sense of inner peace and their sense of possibility. But it's, they're still functional. It's like a form of functional anxiety that most people live with, right? They're a little bit worried. They don't want to upset their wife or the boss or the husband or their parents, but they still can manage to survive. So it's identifying that part within every one of us that is fundamentally based in inadequacy, insecurity, or scarcity, that is really being driven by fear. And it's learning to bring love to that part of us, to me, is my definition, at least, of self-love.
To the shadow self.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when we can learn to love the parts of us that don't feel lovable, then that is the strengthening and the expansion of the essence of love, right? It's easy to love the parts of you that you find attractive or that are flawless and you've got great skin, or a woman's got beautiful hair, or a guy's got great biceps, or, whatever it is, there's no work there. There's no work loving the parts of you that, society has deemed to be perfect. So, okay, great. Congratulations. That's really awesome. You learned to love the fact that you've got, a beautiful set of lips. It's like, but can you love the fact that, you're 32 and you've already got cellulite on your hips? That ain't so easy. Or can you love the fact that, maybe just genetically you've got some sort of weird disposition of your shoulders or your fingers, or, can you love the fact that maybe you didn't go to college and get, a Bachelor of Science or something, and yet in your peer group, everybody's got PhDs and you feel left out? Can you love that part of you that feels inadequate? That's the work.
Yeah, that's the hard work.
Yeah.
100%. And
But
for someone who's, yeah.
what better means and methodology and protocol to develop love than to be presented with things that initially feel unlovable? I mean, that's what a great way to learn.
100%. And for someone who's dating, how would they know if they've found the one?
They won't.
Great. Next question.
Yeah, people love my bluntness. No, you never do. Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of life. The nature of life is uncertainty. You can only say you found the one through your own declaration, and you never really know that. To me, I always say whoever you're with is the right one for now.
Mm.
Right. And that's not in any way to dismiss the beauty of committing to a relationship. It's not to say, oh, okay, well, this worked for a week and I got what I needed, I'll move on. No, I want people to honor, especially in the case of marriage and vows. And, if you're really committing to someone, then commit, because there's an opportunity for growth, even when the trying situations come to the surface, which they will in all relationships, right? So, but it's not about them the right one, because ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody's just a reflection for the true right one, which is our own liberation, our true self.
Mm.
And that's not, some people mishear that, right? And they think, oh, well, that's a sort of egotistical or even narcissistic way to look at life. But at the end of the day, we're all souls here to emancipate ourselves from the constraints with which we arrive. We're all helping each other. So when you're committed to somebody, that's why I said, then commit. And in that commitment, you're going to come across, whatever challenges you're going to come across that are the catalysts to grow together, to learn to overcome whatever self-righteous tendencies someone might have, or being aggressive or withdrawn. We all have our own little mechanisms of survival. But ultimately, there is no right one, because life is just the mirror for our own growth and evolution and expansion. And that is working both ways, right? So it might look like, oh, well, I'm just using this person to grow. Well, guess what they're doing? It's the same thing. Even if you break up with someone because you feel like you've learned whatever it is you need to learn, that breakup is going to be the catalyst for something for them to grow with, right? So you can't do it wrong. That's the good news. You can't fuck it up.
That's great, because a lot of people think, oh, we've broken up, I've just wasted 5 years of my life, and it's not at all.
No, not at all, because you were in that relationship for whatever it is that you needed to see, learn, and go through. There's never any waste of time, Now, if we were to pay attention to Hollywood and the likes of Tom Cruise and, You Complete Me, then of course everyone's going to think there's this right one. But if you really look at it like just logically, right, there's 8 billion people on the planet. What were the chances that the one that you fell in love with and got married happened to be working in the same office building as you, or went to the same fucking coffee shop, or went to the same yoga class? Like, why weren't they in Istanbul or in fucking Iceland, or Australia? It's like, wow, that was so lucky. They happen to be in the same fucking zip code as you. Like, it's just stupid. There's so many people that we can fall in love with, as most people know. Sometimes people do it at the same time. They're already in love with someone else, and that's a whole different conversation. But
yeah, I think people just love to romanticize, and
and I get it. I'm the same. I'm a hopeless romantic, but I tend to, as I tell people, I have an intimate relationship with reality, not fantasy.
Very interesting. And you also say we don't fall in love with the other person. We fall in love with the version of us that we get to be through and with the other person. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. That's also both, for some people, super inspiring, and for some other people, a bit more challenging. So it really speaks to a continuation of what I was just sharing, is that when we really fall in love, what we call falling in love with someone is really about alignment, simpatico, right? Like the essence of our souls, whether you call it soul contract, twin flame, soulmate, whatever it is, have found this comfort with one another for the purpose of our own liberation, emancipation, and sense of vitality and aliveness, right? So really what happens is that when we fall in love, we feel a newfound sense of possibility, right? We start to take better care of ourselves. All of a sudden, you were a sloth, not working out, lying around in your fucking sweatpants, eating Haagen-Dazs, and not attending to the startup company that you wanted to focus on. Then you fall in love, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, you're up at fucking 6, you're running, you're taking care of yourself, you're putting on your best clothes, you're burning some of your old fucking closet, you're eating salads and kale and whatever biohacking freaking protocols are out there, and all of a sudden you're super excited, you're looking for investors for your company. That's what drives you, is how good you feel as a human being, courtesy of the other person. And hopefully they feel the same reciprocal energy, right? Because they're excited and their life also gets upgraded. So it's just about being realistic that what we're super, super touched by when we fall in love with somebody is the sense of possibility that they do inspire in us. But nonetheless, that's what we're attracted to. So we collapse it with the other person. Now, the other person isn't completely redundant in this, of course, because as soon as they go, we might lose that same sense of motivation. So it's both, right? It's and or, right? It's not just me, because if I was able to generate that by myself, then I wouldn't need to fall in love with somebody. So, but that's another conversation where we can, if we really tap into the essence of who we are, we can learn to be self-motivated and to live an extraordinary life, whether we're being, informed by love from somebody else, or even informed by pressure from somebody else. A lot of people get a lot of stuff done in the workplace because their manager or their boss is a little bit of a tyrant, which they wouldn't do otherwise. Or you go to work out with a buddy and you have a, gym class, you go with that person, you work out way harder because you're with your friend, right? So I think ultimately what this comes down to is recognizing the power of community and relationship, and how important it is to have, whether they be romantic, professional, or friendly or familial connections in the world that give us a sense of purpose. So that's really for me, the motivating force here is, yes, other people are the inspiration and the catalyst for an awakening of our own potentiality that is ultimately what becomes that internal sense of biochemistry that we become addicted to, right? The other person becomes the catalyst for it. That's it. And when you see that, it shifts the pressure and the demands that we will put on each other, right? Because if we recognize they're the inspiration, not the source of our joy, because if they do something then that upsets us, pisses us off, and now all of a sudden we're like, well, this is bullshit. Or if they leave us or find someone else, now we're devastated and we go into depression, thinking that the love is over there with them. No, no, no. They may well have been the catalyst and the inspiration, and that warrants all the accolades and acknowledgement. But it wasn't them that I was experiencing. It was me through them and with them. And that's why love is beautiful, because if we can tap into a higher version of ourselves when with somebody else, then of course you want to be with that somebody else, because we want to be the best version of ourselves. So it's just a subtle reframe. It's not to any way diminish the other person, but rather just to more accurately recognize the dynamics of a relationship.
Mm. And they can put like a feeling in your body as well. You have to create that feeling. So that feeling of love, you're the one who created that.
Correct. Exactly. And that goes back to, you're not worried about what other people think about you on the more negative side, right? So we could say love is like the positive, like, oh, I fell in love with someone and now I feel this sense of euphoria and possibility. Oh, this person was judgmental, so I'm worried what they think about me. That's still your own feeling. It's the same. That's why it's powerful to recognize in both cases whether somebody is like the catalyst for the sense of euphoria and love, or seemingly the catalyst for the sense of inadequacy and judgment. Either way, it's still you. And that's where life is the reflection in the mirror, which is the empowering way to understand life. Otherwise, you're just a victim of circumstance and other people, which is not a fun way to live.
That's powerful.
Very
And
powerful. Yeah.
yeah, and I'd like to switch the conversation a bit to
Sure.
addiction. It could
Okay.
be, a substance. It could even be love addiction, what we were
Hmm.
talking about before. How can someone stop the cycle of addiction?
Well, in the case of what you just said, there's substance or love addiction, another person, you've got to see that neither of those are the addiction. They're the symptoms, they're the byproduct. The real addiction is your personality.
Mm.
So the addiction to a substance is from a personality that is based in suffering, fear, limitation, from which we seek relief. As mammals, we want to get away from pain and we want to seek pleasure. So if you're living in a prison in your head that's based in a hostile environment because you think that you're horrible, you're not wanted, you're not loved, you're not good enough, whatever it is, that's the ultimate addiction, is to your own conditioning, your own narrative, your own defined language. The substance is just the byproduct, or the person is just the excuse. It's the, you fall in love with somebody. That's why I said it's important to have this sort of, the way that I reframed it is because if you really think that your love, your value, your survival is based on the other person being in your life, now you're actually super vulnerable, because if they change their mind, they leave, they die, then what you thought of as the source of your empowerment and your joy and your freedom is gone. You're going to be devastated. You see? So the addiction is not to the person, but to the underlying conditioning that has you think that you're inadequate without someone, or that you're not enough without somebody else telling you that you're enough and reassuring you. So it's about being accurate with where is the constraint, where is the problem. The problem is always in our own perspective. It's never in life. When people really understand that, boy, that is a massive shift in the way that people relate to the world that we're in. Because otherwise, people just spend their lives trying to control circumstances, which is exhausting.
Such an important shift in mindset, like understanding, your addiction, whether it's through substance or person, is just a symptom. It's not a problem, because people focus so much on the addiction itself. They don't
Yeah.
think, okay, but what's the, underlying problem behind that? Like, what is the cause?
Correct. And that's what I work on, as I said, I can't give someone something they don't already have, but I can remove what's in the way of them discovering that. That's the most empowering thing that I've ever heard on the planet. Most experts are trying to help people with their problems, which is fine. I understand it. It's caring. It's well intended. You sit down with a psychologist, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a spiritual teacher, a coach, oftentimes they'll try and help you with your anxiety, or they'll help you with your relationship worries or your debt. But to me, it's like that. No, like they're symptoms. They're the byproduct of who you are for yourself, the walking conversation that you're oblivious to. So if we can bring light and awareness to the underlying constraints that are based in the narratives of inadequacy, insecurity, or scarcity that are the precursor to all of the symptomatic problems in society and in your real life, well, now we're really onto something. That's power. So again, why I guess I get all the beautiful love and attention that I get, because people are finally becoming free, realizing, holy shit, like I don't want to focus on my substance. My substance is just the byproduct. Underneath, I'm actually miserable, and I'm miserable because I can remember when I was 5, my parents had another kid that got all the attention, and from that moment forth, I thought I was just less important, and that's a horrible world to live in. And I found comfort in whatever, pick your poison. So yeah, that's why I say I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. And what I'm solving is the underlying deep conditioned narrative that there's fundamentally something wrong with you and that you're a separate entity. And that's just not true.
And your work is so important, and everything you said is so powerful. And I'd just like to end the podcast with this question: what is true happiness?
Well, I have my own definition. I write in quotes, so I might as well use that. I say true happiness is the absence of the search for happiness. Because what that means is you're at peace wherever you are. It's not a future-based phenomenon. I don't need things to be different in order for me to be at peace. And last I checked, that's about as close to happiness as you can get.
I love that. That's so powerful.
Yeah, well, it seems as though you're really understanding my work, because I don't know how many times you said powerful in this conversation, but
Sorry, I don't want it to become redundant, but like it is everything we've talked
No, I
about.
love it. It's a compliment. I appreciate that you listen well and you really get it. And I hope that your listeners understand the same, because we live in a world right now that is just replete with suffering and disease, and people are just not in a great place. And this is why I'm so excited about the world that I'm revealing, which is on the other side of these constraints, which is already our inherent nature, which is based in freedom, love, possibility, vitality, and complete and utter affinity and love with other. So if people are interested in that world, then hopefully they'll find me. And if they want to do a real deep dive, they can, either join my very affordable freedom membership, which is $29 a month for over 100 hours of courses and freeing your mind and how to overcome anxiety and depression and what are relationships, what's true health. Or if you want to go really deep and work with me, you can do my 3-month mastermind. So just a little bit of a plug there, but I'm hoping that most people are like, holy shit, I want to be in this world. It sounds amazing. I'm done of being
Absolutely.
sick
And I'll
and
link
tired.
everything.
Yeah.
I'll link everything in the description so people can find your channel and your courses and everything you talk about. Peter, thank you so much. Thank you so, so much for this conversation and your time and all your knowledge and insights and wisdom. It was amazing. I'm not going to say powerful again.
No, please.
But
I
it
meant
was
it as a
powerful.
compliment. Yeah. No, I love the fact that again, it's just a reflection authentically of the way that you're listening. And what I love is that your response to what I'm sharing, because you're obviously smart, you get it. And you've obviously done this many times, spoken to many people. The fact that you kept saying it, I really took as a flattering reflection of what's landing, So I really hope your listeners equally recognize how powerful it is to step out of the world of limitation, fear, and suffering and disease. And last I checked, that's what everyone's looking for. They just don't know where to look, and hopefully now they do.
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely, I'm sure they'll get immense value from this podcast.
Yeah. Amazing.
Thank you so much again.
Francesca, lovely to be with you. Have a beautiful rest of your day.